A millionaire tells his fiancée he was bankrupt to test her love. Her reaction shocked him. William Harrington was a 33-year-old man who seemed to have the world at his feet. Between loyal friends, luxurious trips, and a fortune that put him at the top of the elite, he lived like a true modern prince. But everything changed when he met Anne Carter, a 25-year-old, during a trip to the sunny coast of Greece. Anne was unlike any woman William had ever met. Simple, spontaneous, and with a smile that lit up any room, she worked in a clothing store in Denver and came from a financially stable family, but far from the luxury that surrounded William's life. Despite their different backgrounds, the two connected naturally and intensely. During their days at the beach, Anne and William spent hours chatting under the sun, laughing at silly stories and sharing dreams that, until then, belonged to different worlds. The atmosphere seemed perfect, but there was an invisible tension in the group. Michael. Michael was one of William's oldest friends and had traveled with him and others to Greece. Like William, he was interested in Anne. His charm and confident attitude made him a worthy rival, but Anne was clear from the start. Her interest was in William, and that was obvious to everyone. Michael, however, was not the kind of man who accepted losing easily. After the trip, William and Anne faced the challenge of distance. He in New York, surrounded by business that consumed his attention, and she in Denver, living a simple but fulfilling routine. Even so, the daily messages and occasional visits strengthened the passion that had been born under the Greek sky. A few months later, William realized that he could no longer live away from Anne. He planned an intimate dinner at the top of a skyscraper in New York, where just the two of them would share the breathtaking view of the city. Dressed elegantly, William handed Anne a small velvet box and, his eyes sparkling, asked, "Anne Carter, will you be my wife?" Anne looked at him with tears in her eyes, a mixture of surprise and happiness taking over her face. "Yes," she replied without hesitation, as William slipped the ring onto her finger. They toasted that moment, which seemed to seal the promise of a perfect future. The next day, William and Anne met up with their group of friends to share the news. The atmosphere was one of celebration, laughter, and warm congratulations. But among the happy faces, there was one that stood out. Michael watched the couple with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, hiding feelings that only he understood. William's friends reacted with apparent enthusiasm, applauding and offering toasts to the couple. However, Michael, sitting at the back, seemed less excited. He smiled, but his eyes didn't reflect the same joy. "Congratulations, Will. Congratulations, Anne," he said, raising his glass. The intonation was polite, but there was something in the tone that left a trace of doubt in the air. Anne didn't notice. She was busy answering one of her friend's questions about the wedding planning. But William, although he tried to ignore it, noticed the discomfort in Michael's gaze. He tried to push the thought away, but the doubt had already been planted. Later, when Anne went to the toilet, Michael and two other friends called William into the restaurant bar for a private chat. They surrounded him with serious expressions, as if they were going to intervene. "William, don't get us wrong," began James, one of the closest friends. "We're really happy for you. But we have to ask, do you think you're going too fast?" William arched an eyebrow. "Too fast? I love her. Isn't that enough?" "Of course, loving her is enough," Michael interjected, with a tone that sounded almost paternal. "But look, you've known her for how long? A year, not even that. Man, you've never been the impulsive type. You've always been able to think in the long term. Don't you think maybe you should slow down a bit?" "Exactly," added another friend. "No one here is saying that Anne isn't amazing. But isn't she, how can I put it, too keen to sort things out too quickly?" William frowned. "What are you implying?" "We're not implying anything," Michael replied, feigning discomfort. "We're just worried. Remember how she always talked about the distance between you, that maybe it wouldn't work out? Doesn't it seem a bit strategic that, a short time later, marriage is the magic solution?" Those words pierced William's thoughts like needles. He tried to refute them, but instead he remembered the conversations he'd had with Anne during their courtship. He could hear her voice like a distant echo. "I just don't know how this can work, William. We're so far apart, and you have your life there. Maybe we should break up before it gets any harder." At the time, he had thought she was just being realistic, but now, in the light of Michael and his friend's words, it sounded different. "That's what we mean, Will," Michael continued, pressing. Anne may be a wonderful person, but everyone has their insecurities. Maybe she's afraid of losing you and is acting too quickly to make sure that doesn't happen. It wouldn't be malicious, but you need to be sure before you take the next step." William was silent for a moment, holding the glass of whiskey in his hands. He didn't want to believe what he was hearing, but Michael's words seemed so reasonable. Over the next few days, doubt slowly began to creep into William's mind. He remembered how Anne on several occasions had mentioned that perhaps the long-distance relationship wouldn't work. At the time, he had responded with declarations of love and promises that everything would work out. Now those same conversations sounded different. Had she subtly and strategically steered the situation towards his decision to get married? Her smile, which had once seemed spontaneous and full of joy, now seemed more calculated in his memories. He hated to think it, but it was impossible to ignore the voices in his head. Michael, with well-disguised jealousy, continued to plant seeds of doubt in William. He was subtle, always putting himself forward as a concerned friend. "I just want the best for you, man. You've got so much to lose. Don't you think it would be good to wait a bit longer, get to know Anne even better?" William began to observe Anne differently. He noticed every gesture, every smile, every word. He loved this woman deeply, but did she love him in the same way? Or was she preoccupied with ensuring his safety, perhaps even his financial future? Anne, on the other hand, seemed oblivious to the change in William's behavior. She continued to plan for the future with enthusiasm, sharing ideas about marriage and even suggesting changes to their routines in order to be closer. But to William, all this seemed more like a strategy than a genuine expression of love. Gradually, what had been a solid love began to turn into a maze of uncertainty for William. He wondered if he really knew the woman who was about to become his wife, and most importantly, he wondered if he was making the biggest mistake of his life. And like an ever-present ghost, Michael continued to watch, always with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Michael watched his plan unfold with silent satisfaction. He knew that the seeds of doubt he had planted in William were beginning to bear fruit. William's more distant behavior towards Anne was a clear reflection of this, and Michael, driven by the jealousy that consumed him, decided it was time to take the next step. It wasn't enough that William doubted Anne's love. He wanted to completely destroy the bond that united them. Earlier that evening, Michael picked up his cell phone and dialed William's number. On the other end, William answered with a tired but polite tone of voice, as he always did with his friend. "Will, we need to talk," Michael began, his voice low and serious. "I've been thinking a lot about all this, and I think we might have an opportunity here. Something that could really give you the answers you need." William frowned, intrigued but also suspicious. "What do you mean, Michael?" Michael took a deep breath, as if he was about to reveal a big secret. "I was thinking, if Anne really loves you, if her love has nothing to do with your money, then why not put it to the test? Don't you want to know with absolute certainty if she's with you for the man you are and not for what you can offer?" William remained silent. The suggestion was bold, absurd even, but the doubt was already rooted in his mind. Still, he couldn't completely accept the idea. "And how do you think I would do that, Michael? What exactly are you suggesting?" "It's simple, Will," Michael replied with calculated calm. "You tell her you've lost everything. Pretend that a negotiation has gone wrong, that your fortune has disappeared. See how she reacts. If she stays by your side, you'll get your answer. If she walks away, well, then you'll know she was never with you for the right reason." William let out a nervous, almost incredulous laugh. "Are you crazy? Pretending I've lost my fortune? That would be cruel, Michael." "I'm not saying it will be easy, Will," Michael insisted, his voice now filled with false concern. "But think about it. I'm your best friend. I'm on the outside, seeing everything from an angle that you can't. What if she's only interested in what you're doing? What if she's only interested in what you can offer? Wouldn't you rather know that now before you get married than find out too late?" Michael's words fell like lead on William. He trusted Michael. They had been friends for years, practically brothers. If there was anyone William could trust to keep his best intentions in mind, it was him. Or so William believed. "Michael, I don't know. It just seems wrong. Anne's good. I know her." "It's precisely because she seems so good that you need to be sure," Michael retorted, intensifying his onslaught. "You're an intelligent man, Will. Don't be taken in by appearances. A test like this could save your life." William was silent for a long moment. Michael's words echoed in his mind, mixing with the doubts that were already tormenting him. He thought of the conversations with Anne about the distance, the time she had mentioned that it might not work out. He thought of her smiles, her sweet words, the moments of hesitation that now seemed calculated. "I don't know if I can do it," she finally said, her voice wavering. "You can do it," said Michael categorically, "because deep down, you want to know the truth too. And when it's all over, when she proves that she's on your side for who you are, you'll thank me. And if she's not, well, you'll be spared a lifetime of regrets." Michael's logic seemed irrefutable. He appealed to William's rational side, to the fear he already felt that he was making a mistake, and as much as a part of William wanted to resist, he eventually gave in. "Okay," said William, almost in a whisper, "I'll do it." Michael smiled on the other end of the line, a smile that William couldn't see but which carried all the satisfaction of someone who was winning a perverse game. "This is the right thing, Will. You're doing it for yourself, for your own peace of mind." In the days that followed, William prepared to stage the big lie. He discreetly consulted a lawyer to work out a plausible bankruptcy scenario. He asked for help to create false documents that could support his story, should Anne ask questions. All this was done with a growing weight on his heart. Every detail felt like a betrayal of the love he felt for her, but doubt was stronger. Finally, on the night he was due to tell her everything, William was sitting on the sofa in his living room, with Anne by his side, holding his hand. She had come back from her trip that day and was animatedly talking about ideas for the wedding, while he looked at her with an expression that mixed guilt and apprehension. "Anne," he began, interrupting her, "I need to tell you something." She stopped talking, realizing the serious tone in his voice. "What is it, love?" He took a deep breath, trying to keep his voice steady. "I made a bad investment. Something I thought would work out, but I lost everything. Anne, I'm broke." Anne was silent, her eyes wide as she tried to process the information. The air in the room seemed to get heavier, and William at that moment realized that there was no turning back. William watched every detail, Anne's every move after the revelation. The silence that followed her confession seemed eternal, and he felt a knot forming in his throat as he waited for her reaction. His eyes locked on hers, searching for some clue as to what she was feeling, but Anne's expression was indecipherable. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. Her eyes drifted to the floor, and William saw that she was trying to control her breathing. He didn't know if she was about to cry, scream, or simply get up and leave. "Anne," he began, his voice laden with hesitation and guilt. "I know this is a lot, but I had to tell you. I couldn't keep it from you." She raised her hand to ask him to stop, still unable to face him directly. Then, without saying anything, she slowly got up from the sofa and walked to the kitchen. William stood there, his heart beating so hard that it seemed to echo around the room. He almost called her back, but something in the way she moved made him wait. In the kitchen, Anne turned on the tap and let the water run for a few seconds before filling 2 glasses. William could hear the little noises she made as she moved, as if she was trying to calm down before going back into the living room. He felt a tightness in his chest at the thought that perhaps he had made an irreparable mistake. Finally, she returned, holding the 2 glasses of water. She sat down next to him on the sofa, held out one of the glasses to him and took a small sip from the other. For a few seconds, which seemed like an eternity to William, she stared at the glass in her hands, as if organizing her thoughts. When she finally spoke, her voice was low but firm. "William, you know I never imagined being in a relationship like ours. You, with your whole world, with your life full of things I would never have known on my own. And me, with my simple life." She paused, taking a deep breath. "But that was never what attracted me to you." William's eyes widened in surprise at her tone. He opened his mouth to reply, but she held up her hand, asking him to finish. "I fell in love with you, with the man who makes me laugh until my stomach hurts, with the man who listens to me when I'm having a bad day, who never makes me feel small, even though I'm in such a big world. This was never about the money, William." He stared at her in disbelief as she continued. "If you've lost everything, it doesn't change who you are. And if we no longer have the grand wedding you wanted, then fine, let's cancel everything. I don't need parties or luxury to marry you. I just need you." William's heart leapt when he heard those words. Anne wasn't just saying that she would stand by him. She was showing him that her mind was made up, that her love was unconditional. Still, he tried to speak, as if to make sure she understood the gravity of what she was accepting. "Anne, I don't know what it's going to be like from now on. I'm not sure how we're going to start again." She gave a small smile, a soft smile, but full of determination. "We'll start again from scratch together. We'll live simply. And you know what? That could be good. It could be a chance for us to have a life with less stuff and more meaning." William couldn't hold back his emotion. He pulled her into an embrace, wrapping his arms around her tightly. He smelled the familiar scent of her hair, heard her breathing close to his ear. But instead of feeling complete relief, something inside him tightened. At that moment, as he held Anne in his arms, a wave of regret washed over William. He realized the size of the mistake he had made. How could he have doubted her? How could he let himself be influenced by Michael's words and put Anne to the test in such a cruel way? But he didn't say anything. He just kept holding her longer, feeling her warmth, while a voice in his mind kept repeating, "I did this to her. I put her in this situation." Anne, on the other hand, seemed calm. When he finally released the embrace, she looked at him with a twinkle in her eye, held his hand and said, "Tomorrow I'll call the suppliers and cancel everything. Don't worry about it, okay? Let's start planning a simpler wedding, something that's in keeping with our new reality." William nodded, unable to say more than that. He didn't want to lie to her anymore, but at the same time, he knew that revealing the truth at that moment would be even worse. As Anne began to talk about how they could reorganize their lives, William just watched her. He saw her in a new way, as someone who was willing to give up everything for him, without hesitation. She was everything he could have dreamed of, and he realized that he had perhaps ruined that forever. William had been in a whirlwind of emotions since his conversation with Anne. Although he knew he should feel relieved at the way she had reacted to his supposed bankruptcy, guilt was a constant weight on his shoulders. He knew he had made a mistake by putting Anne to the test, but now he faced an even greater dilemma. How could he tell her the truth without destroying her trust in him? The next day, William decided to call Michael. He needed to share what had happened and perhaps get some advice. As he waited for Michael to pick up, he felt a mixture of anxiety and nervousness. As soon as Michael's voice came over the line, casual and carefree, William got straight to the point. "Michael, I spoke to Anne yesterday. I told her about the bankruptcy." Michael paused, adjusting his tone to sound genuinely interested. "And how did she react?" William let out a sigh before answering. "She surprised me. She said she loves me, and that doesn't change anything. She even said that we're going to cancel the grand wedding and start from scratch together." On the other end of the line, Michael felt his anger grow like a wildfire, but he managed to mask his feelings. He let out a laugh that sounded cheerful, but hid his discontent. "That's great, Will. That's exactly what you needed to hear, right? Now you know she's with you for the man you are." "Yes," replied William hesitantly, "but I don't feel any better about it. It was cruel, Michael. I put her in a terrible situation. She didn't deserve it." Michael tried to contain his frustration, keeping his tone friendly. "Don't be so hard on yourself, Will. You did it for a good reason. And look, it all worked out in the end. She passed the test. That just proves that she's the right woman for you." William murmured something in agreement, but his heart was heavy. The conversation with Michael hadn't helped ease his guilt. In fact, it only seemed to amplify it. He thanked his friend and ended the call, feeling more lost than ever. Meanwhile, Michael threw the phone down hard on the table, the fake smile disappearing instantly. His anger bubbled under the surface. How could Anne have reacted so perfectly? He had expected her to flinch, to show some sign of hidden interest or hesitation. But not only did she stand firm, she was also willing to sacrifice everything for William. This only strengthened the bond between them, and Michael couldn't bear the thought of losing the chance he once believed he could have with Anne. Over the next few days, William tried to concentrate on work and reorganizing his life with Anne, but something was different. She seemed less present, as if something was distracting her. It wasn't an obvious change, but William began to notice small details that hadn't been there before. Anne spent more time on her cell phone, sending messages that made her smile slightly before quickly putting the device away, as if she wanted to hide something. She also started going out alone more often, something she rarely did during her days in New York. "I need to sort a few things out," she said one morning as she put on a light jacket and picked up her handbag. "What kind of things?" asked William, trying to maintain a casual tone. "Oh, just my things." "Don't worry," she replied, kissing him quickly before heading out the door. William tried to ignore the discomfort he felt, but he couldn't. Something about her attitude seemed different, distant. He began to observe her schedule, noticing that Anne almost always left at the same times of the day and returned hours later without offering many details. One afternoon, while working from home, William received a call from a wedding-related supplier. "Mr. Harrington, I'm returning to confirm the cancellation of services. Miss Anne has already contacted us." William thanked her and hung up, but felt a twinge of discomfort. He knew that Anne had promised to cancel everything, but the supplier's tone seemed to indicate that she was taking care of more than just the wedding preparations. Later that evening, while they were having dinner, William tried to bring up the subject. "Anne, you seem so busy lately. Is everything all right?" She looked at him in surprise before smiling. "Of course it is. I'm just trying to adjust a few things now that our lives are going to change. It's a lot to process, you know?" He nodded, but wasn't convinced. Something didn't seem right. Over the next few days, Anne's behavior continued to fuel his suspicions. William tried to rationalize. Maybe it was just the stress of moving. Perhaps she was trying to help him in some way and didn't want to worry him with the details. But in his heart, doubt was growing. He began to wonder what might be going on. Was Anne hiding something from him? What if, despite everything she said, she was starting to rethink the relationship now that she believed he was bankrupt? The thought tormented him. One evening, while Anne was in the shower, William picked up her cell phone, which was on the table. He knew it was wrong, but curiosity and insecurity were stronger than his ethics at that moment. Before he could unlock it, Anne appeared in the hallway, calling for him. William quickly put his cell phone back, feeling his heart race. "Will, are you there?" she asked, her voice nonchalant. "Yes, here," he replied, trying to sound natural. Anne came into the living room, wiping her hair with a towel, and smiled at him before sitting down on the sofa. "I was thinking, maybe I'll stay here in New York for a few more days. Since you're selling the house soon and, well, we're moving to a smaller one and I'm still on vacation, we can enjoy this house a bit more before starting this new phase. Speaking of which, when do you have to sell your house?" William nodded again, forcing a smile, but his mind was racing. He needed to find out what was going on. Anne was acting strangely. Anne's behavior continued to plague William, like a shadow he couldn't shake off. Every detail seemed to fuel his doubts, and the apparently casual comment about the sale of the mansion was the trigger. Why was she so interested in the sale? Why did she want to stay longer in New York now that he was supposedly bankrupt? These questions hammered at his mind, and he knew he needed answers. That afternoon, Anne left again, claiming to have things to sort out. William, with a heavy heart, decided that he could no longer wait for the answers to come to him. He had to find out the truth, even if it meant taking action that went against his principles. So he grabbed his car keys and decided to follow her. He kept a safe distance, watching as Anne walked through the busy streets of New York. She seemed distracted, occasionally glancing at her cell phone before getting into a cab. William, his heart racing, followed the vehicle along the avenues, while his mind imagined the worst possible scenarios. After a few minutes, the cab stopped in front of a discreet but elegant restaurant in the city center. Anne got out, straightening her coat and looking around as if she was expecting someone. William parked the car a short distance away and watched carefully. Then he saw him. A tall man in an impeccable suit approached Anne with a smile on his face. She smiled back, and they exchanged a brief but friendly hug. William felt his chest tighten, as if he had been punched. His eyes were fixed on the two of them as they entered the restaurant together. His heart raced, his mind flooded with questions and scenarios he didn't want to imagine. Who was that man? Why was Anne meeting him in secret? He tried to rationalize, but anger and insecurity overwhelmed him. With trembling hands, William picked up his cell phone and dialed Michael's number. He needed to vent. He needed guidance, even if it was from someone who was unknowingly manipulating every step of this situation. "Michael," he began, his voice tense. "I followed Anne. She is with another man now. They went into a restaurant. Michael took a calculated pause, hiding the satisfaction that was growing inside him. Dude, calm down, he replied, with a worried tone that seemed genuine. You don't know who he is. He could be anything. A friend, a work colleague. But why in secret? Why didn't she tell me any of this, William retorted, his voice getting louder. Look, I understand your anger, said Michael, keeping his tone soft. But you need to be smart now. Don't go out there and make a scene. Take some pictures, document what you see, and then go home. When she gets back, you confront her with the evidence. That way she can't deny it. William took a deep breath, trying to calm down, but his heart was still pounding in his chest. You're right, he said, although the words pained him. I'll take the pictures. Yeah, mate, said Michael, a mischievous grin taking over his face as William couldn't see him. You're doing the right thing. Trust me. William hung up the phone and picked up his cell phone, adjusting the angle to capture Anne and the mysterious man entering the restaurant. He took several photos, feeling a mixture of guilt and indignation. When he had finished, he got back into his car and drove home, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The drive back seemed endless, and his mind kept replaying the images he had just captured. Every detail felt like a sign of betrayal. Every smile she gave the other man felt like a stab wound. He felt anger, sadness, and, above all, a sense that everything was falling apart. When he got home, the weight was even more torturous. He paced back and forth, constantly looking at his watch. Time seemed to drag on, every minute an eternity, as he mentally rehearsed how he was going to confront her. Finally, he heard the sound of the key turning in the door. Anne entered, smiling slightly at the sight of him. Hi, love. Is everything all right? William couldn't contain his tension. He took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, but his words came out harsher than he had intended. Anne, can we talk? She stopped, surprised by his tone. Of course, what is it? William gestured for her to sit down, but he himself remained standing, pacing the room as if gathering his courage for what was to come. I know you've been going out a lot lately, and today I decided to follow you. Anne's smile disappeared instantly, and her gaze turned serious. You followed me? Yes, he replied, his voice firm. And I saw you going into a restaurant with another man. Who is he, Anne? And why didn't you tell me about it? The silence that followed was piercing. Anne stared at him, as if processing what he had just said, and William felt as if the floor was about to give way beneath his feet. The atmosphere in the room seemed as heavy as a storm about to break. Anne, sitting on the sofa, felt William's accusing gaze weighing down on her, as if she were on trial for a crime she hadn't committed. He stood, hands in his pockets, pacing back and forth as he tried to control the anger and frustration growing inside him. I just want you to be honest with me, Anne, he began, his voice rough but trembling. Who is that man? Why did you meet him in secret? Are you cheating on me? Anne's eyes widened in surprise at the direct accusation. She shook her head in disbelief as her shock quickly turned to indignation. How can you ask that, William? After everything we've been through, how can you think I'd do that to you? Then explain, he retorted, his voice louder now. If it's not cheating, why all this mystery? Why haven't you told me anything? Do you really expect me to believe that you have nothing to hide? Anne felt her heart squeeze. She knew William was hurt, but the way he looked at her, as if she were guilty of something terrible, was too much to bear. I can't believe you're saying these things, she murmured, her voice breaking as tears began to well up in her eyes. I have no choice, Anne, William exclaimed, raising his hands in a gesture of frustration. I see you going out, acting differently, meeting another man. And now you're here, refusing to tell me the truth. What else am I supposed to think? She blinked rapidly, trying to hold back the tears, but she couldn't. They streamed down her face. Hot and silent. I would never do anything like that to you, she said, her voice now choked with tears. But William, you're treating me like I'm a horrible person, as if what I feel for you isn't real. It's killing me. Then tell me the truth, he insisted, stepping closer. If it's not cheating, tell me what's going on, because honestly, I can't understand it anymore. Anne stood up abruptly, the tears now falling freely. I'm not going to stand here and be accused of something I didn't do, she said, her voice broken by emotion. I thought you knew me, William. I thought you trusted me, but it seems I was mistaken. Before he could reply, Anne quickly left the room, picking up her bag and opening the door to the mansion. William stood there, unable to stop her, watching as she left and closed the door with a bang. Anne walked through the cold streets of New York, hugging herself to protect herself from the icy wind. Her tears were still falling, but now they were mixed with a sense of confusion and despair. She loved William, but didn't know how to deal with the accusations, the lack of trust. She went into a nearby cafe, seeking refuge to process everything that was happening. Taking a seat at a table in the corner, Anne ordered a coffee, but had barely touched the cup when it arrived. She was lost in her thoughts, trying to understand how everything had fallen apart so quickly. The William she knew, the kind and loving man, seemed to have been replaced by someone she barely recognized. As she wiped her eyes with a handkerchief, she didn't notice that Michael had entered the cafeteria. He had left the house to cool off, but he was actually waiting anxiously for news of William. When he saw Anne, alone and crying, he felt a wave of satisfaction. It was obvious that something had gone wrong between her and William, and this was the perfect opportunity to act. Michael approached slowly, with a carefully neutral expression. "Anne?" he called, in a soft voice and feigned surprise. "Are you all right?" She looked up, surprised to see him there. For a moment she considered saying that she wanted to be alone, but the tone of concern in his voice disarmed her. No, she admitted, wiping her eyes again. "I'm not well." Michael pulled out a chair and sat down opposite her, leaning forward slightly. "What happened?" he asked, his voice full of false sympathy. "You can talk to me. You know I only want your good." Anne hesitated. Part of her wanted to get it off her chest, but another part knew it could be a mistake. Still, her vulnerability at the moment made her give in. "It's William," she finally said. He thinks I'm cheating on him." Michael arched his eyebrows, feigning shock. "Cheating? But that's absurd. How could he think something like that? You love him." "I know," she replied, her voice breaking, "but he started to doubt me, accusing me, and I can't understand where it's coming from. It's like he's not the same anymore." Michael shook his head slowly, as if in deep thought. "I'm sorry about that, Anne. You deserve more. You deserve someone who sees the value in you and trusts you without question." Anne looked at him, surprised by his words, but didn't reply. She was emotionally drained and her mind was a mess. Michael realized that she was vulnerable and decided that it would be best not to pressure her at that moment. "Listen," he said softly. "If you need someone to talk to, I'll be here. You're not alone, Anne. Remember that." She nodded slightly without saying anything. Michael ordered a coffee and sat with her in silence, waiting patiently for the right moment to take the next step in his plan. Michael watched Anne with a mixture of satisfaction and desire as she remained silent, absent-mindedly fiddling with her coffee cup. Her crying had subsided, but the traces of sadness and confusion were still etched on her face. He knew that this moment was precious, that he had to act with caution. He couldn't frighten her or appear insensitive. So he leaned over slightly, getting closer, and began to gently stroke her head, pretending to comfort her. "Anne, I hate seeing you like this," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "You're an incredible person. You don't deserve to go through this." Anne felt the touch, and for a moment allowed herself to accept the consolation. But then a feeling of unease came over her. Michael was too close, too intimate. She raised her head suddenly, straightening her posture and pulling away slightly, trying to be polite but firm. "Thank you, Michael, but I'm fine," she said without much conviction. Michael disguised his frustration, backing away just enough not to seem insistent. He noticed the hesitation in her words, a sign that she was still vulnerable. "I know you're strong, Anne," he replied, with a gentle smile. "But sometimes, even strong people need someone to listen." Anne sighed, looking at him with her eyes still moist. "Can you believe William thinks I'm with him for the money?" she asked, her voice laced with pain. "He thinks I'm only with him because he's rich, and that, now that he's broke, I'm going to abandon him." Michael paused as if processing what he had just heard. Inside, his heart raced. The opportunity he had been waiting for had arrived. Now he just had to play his cards right. "Anne," he began, choosing his words carefully, "I need to tell you something, and it's because I really care about you. I want you to know the truth, even if it's hard to hear." Anne stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" Michael took a deep breath, pretending to hesitate, as if he were revealing a secret he'd rather not tell. "William is not bankrupt." She frowned in surprise. What are you talking about?" "I know it sounds absurd," Michael continued, holding her hands as if to convey sincerity, "but his bankruptcy was a plan. He wanted to test you, to see if you were with him out of love or interest. He wanted to be sure before he got married." For a moment, Anne said nothing. She just stared at him, the words echoing in her mind. Then, slowly, understanding began to dawn, and her eyes filled with tears again, but now with anger. "Are you saying that all this was a lie?" she asked, her voice trembling. Michael nodded, maintaining his worried expression. "Yes, I only found out about it recently, but I couldn't believe it. He thought he was doing the right thing, but it clearly hurt you a lot. And honestly, I don't think he realized how unfair it was to you." Anne felt her heart squeeze. The pain of William's distrust was one thing, but knowing that he had planned the whole thing, that he had lied to her, was almost unbearable. She felt as if the whole basis of their relationship had been destroyed. "Why?" she whispered, more to herself than to Michael. "Why would he do this to me?" Michael squeezed her hands lightly, feigning sympathy. "He was afraid, Anne. Afraid of losing you. But that doesn't justify what he did. No one should treat you like that, especially someone who claims to love you." Anne removed her hands from his and brought them to her face, trying to hold back the tears that kept falling. Michael knew that this was the moment to take the next step in his plan. "Anne," he said softly, "you don't have to go home today. In fact, I don't think you should. William needs to understand what he did wrong. He needs to feel the weight of the consequences of what he's done." She looked up at him, still confused. "And what do I do? Where do I go?" Michael smiled gently, trying to look like a helpful friend. "Come to my place, just for today. You can rest, think, get yourself together. I promise I won't bother you. It's just so you have somewhere quiet." Anne hesitated. Part of her wanted to refuse, but she felt so lost, so betrayed, that she couldn't think straight. Michael seemed so sincere, so concerned. She didn't have the strength to argue. "I don't know," she said, almost in a whisper. "Trust me," Michael insisted with a reassuring smile. "I just want to help. You deserve some peace after all this." Anne nodded slowly, unsure if she was making the right decision, but unable to think of any other alternative at the moment. Michael smiled, satisfied, and got up to pay the bill. "Come on," he said, helping her up. "I'll take care of you, Anne, I promise." As he guided her out of the cafe, Michael felt a wave of triumph. The plan was working perfectly. Now it was only a matter of time. As she left the cafe, Anne felt the cold New York wind hit her face, but the icy breeze was nothing compared to the storm inside her. Every step felt heavy, as if she was trying to escape from what she had just discovered. Michael followed her for a few meters, calling out to her in a worried tone of voice, but she held up her hand, asking him to stop. "Michael, thank you, but I need some time alone," she said, her voice low and firm. "Anne, wait," he insisted, reaching for her shoulder. "You're like this, so vulnerable. You can't just walk away. Let me help. Please." Anne turned away briefly, her eyes still shining with anger and sadness. "I don't need help. I need to think, alone." Without giving him a chance to reply, she turned again and started walking in the opposite direction with quick, determined steps. Michael stood still, watching as she walked away until she disappeared around the corner. He felt a mixture of frustration and anger. How could she have refused his help? He had come so close to conquering her, and now she had simply slipped out of his hands. "Damn her conscience," he muttered to himself, clenching his fists. "But it doesn't end here." Michael took a deep breath, trying to pull himself together. He needed to regain control of the situation, and fast. Picking up his cell phone, he dialed William's number with a calculated expression, already formulating exactly what he would say. William answered on the second ring, his voice tense and anxious. "Michael, what happened?" Michael closed his eyes briefly, feigning grief. "Will, I ran into Anne. Is she all right?" asked William immediately. "Well, it's complicated," replied Michael, dropping his voice to a low tone. "She's pretty shaken up, man. I met her by chance in a coffee shop. She was crying, completely devastated." William felt his heart squeeze. "And you spoke to her? What did she say? Did she tell you who the man was with her?" "Yes, I did. Michael continued, with a tone that mixed concern and resignation. She said she knows everything, Will, about the bankruptcy plan. I have no idea how she found out, but it's really hurt her. She feels that you don't trust her, that you tested her, when you should have believed in her love for you. I think that man must have told her. Don't you recognize him? William pressed his cell phone to his ear, feeling a lump in his throat. He knew he had made a mistake by deceiving Anne, but he hadn't expected the truth to come out like this. I need to find her, he said resolutely. I need to explain, tell her how sorry I am that I was wrong. Michael shook his head, even though William couldn't see him. I understand how you feel, Will, but I don't think it's a good idea right now. Anne is very angry. She says she doesn't want to see you. In fact, she told me she never wants to see you again. Michael's words hit William like a punch. He remained silent, trying to process what he had just heard. Are you sure about this, Michael? He asked, his voice laden with pain. Yes, Michael replied with false sadness. And to be honest, I even tried to convince her to come home so you could talk. I thought you two needed to clear things up, but she refused. She said it wouldn't make sense, that she was tired of being tested and not being valued. William ran his hand over his face in despair. I don't know what to do. I can't just let her go. Will, sometimes the best thing we can do is give each other space, said Michael, trying to sound like a concerned friend. If you try to force a conversation now, it will only make things worse. Let her cool down. Maybe in time, she'll decide to listen to what you have to say. William didn't want to accept that, but he knew Michael could be right. He sighed, feeling defeated. Okay, he finally said. I'll wait. But Michael, if you find her again, please tell her that I'm sorry, that I'm willing to do anything to make it right. Of course, replied Michael, with a slight smile of satisfaction that William couldn't see. You know I'm here to help, Will. Always. When the call ended, Michael looked at the phone, satisfied. He had planted the idea in William's head that he shouldn't look for Anne, giving him more time to act without interference. But at the same time, he knew he had to be careful. Anne was smart and emotionally strong. If he pushed too hard, she could walk away forever. On the other side of town, Anne walked aimlessly, still trying to process everything she had discovered. Her heart was heavy, not just from William's lie, but from the feeling that their entire relationship had been an illusion. She knew she had to confront him eventually, but for now she needed to find out what she really wanted. Anne took a deep breath as she held the folder with the documents in her trembling hands. She was determined. She wasn't going to cry. She wasn't going to give in to the pain that seemed to be crushing her chest. All she wanted now was to confront William, show him everything she had done in secret, and then get out of his life, forever. She had already arranged for Mr. Thomas, the man William had seen earlier in the restaurant, to accompany her and confirm every detail. Let's get this over with, she said, more to herself than to the man next to her, as the cab approached William's mansion. When it arrived, Anne got out of the car with firm steps. She held her briefcase against her chest like a shield. Mr. Thomas followed her discreetly, carrying a small folder with receipts and documents that confirmed what Anne was about to reveal. William was sitting in the living room, his head down, deep in thought. Silence filled the room, interrupted only by the sound of footsteps in the hallway. When he looked up and saw Anne standing there, he was paralyzed. For a moment, he thought it was a dream or a guilt-induced hallucination. Anne, he said, his voice hesitant and full of emotion. Don't speak, she replied, raising her hand to silence him. I came here because I have something to show you. Something you should have known before you accused me, before you tested me, before you doubted who I was. William felt his heart squeeze. He tried to get up, but her gaze held him still. Anne walked over to the table, placed the folder on it, and began to speak. This is Mr. Thomas, she said, pointing to the man next to her. He's a wedding planner. We've been working together for days to plan our wedding. And I did it alone, William. I took all my savings, every penny I had saved from working as a saleswoman in a store, to pay for everything. Why? Because I wanted it to be perfect. Because I wanted it to be perfect. Because I love you, and I wanted it to be a beautiful surprise. Her words hit him like a blow. William remained silent, unable to formulate an answer. He stared at Anne, at Mr. Thomas, at the folder she had brought, feeling the weight of guilt build up on his shoulders. Anne opened the folder and began to remove the papers, placing them in front of him. Here are the contracts with the suppliers, The decorations, the buffet, the flowers, the music, everything. And do you know why I wanted to know so much about the sale of the mansion? Because my plan was to get married here, in this house where we had such wonderful times. I wanted it to be unforgettable, a perfect closure to this phase of your life. William felt his throat go dry as he read the documents. The amounts were there, the payments recorded, every detail proving what Anne had said. He looked at Mr. Thomas, who just nodded. "That's right," said the wedding planner with a professional tone. "Miss Anne took care of everything herself. She was extremely dedicated and made sure that every detail was perfect. It was an honor to work with her." Anne crossed her arms, waiting for some kind of response. But William was in shock, unable to say anything. Tears threatened to fall from his eyes, but he held them back. "You don't trust me, William," Anne continued, her voice full of hurt. "You chose to test me, to deceive me, rather than believe that what I feel for you is true. That destroyed everything we had. And now there's nothing left." "Anne, please," he began, but his voice failed him. He wanted to beg, to explain, to make it right, but the words seemed to slip out. She shook her head firmly. "No, I'm not here to listen to excuses. I'm here to show you who I am, for you to know what you've lost, and now that you know, I'm leaving." Anne picked up her bag, cast one last glance at William, and walked out the door. Mr. Thomas followed her in silence, but before he left, he turned to William and said, "She's an extraordinary woman, Mr. Harrington. Think carefully about what you've done." William stood in the middle of the room, feeling as if the floor had been ripped out from under his feet. The love of his life had just left, and he knew he had only himself to blame. A short while later, Michael arrived, pretending to be worried. He found William still sitting on the sofa, his head buried in his hands. "Will," said Michael, with a tone of false compassion, "I heard Anne's gone, hasn't she?" William looked up, his gaze empty and downcast. She showed me everything she did, and I lost her, Michael. I've lost the best thing I've ever had." Michael sat down next to him, putting a hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry, buddy, but maybe this is for the best. Maybe you need some time apart to understand what you really want." William didn't reply. He was lost in his thoughts, reliving every moment, every decision that had brought him to that point. Meanwhile, Michael tried to contain the smile of satisfaction that threatened to break out. For him, the game was far from over. The months that had passed since Anne's departure had been torture for William. Every day seemed a little emptier, as if something essential had been torn away from him. He tried to distract himself with work, travel, and the support of his friends, but nothing filled the void left by Anne. She was the woman of his life, and he knew he had made a mistake that he might never be able to fix. Michael, as always, was close by. He insisted that William should forget Anne, move on and find someone who wasn't so complicated. "You're wasting your life on this, Will. Go live. Go meet people. Anne has already moved on," he said, while feigning a tone of concern. William listened, but couldn't accept it. Every time Michael mentioned that Anne had gotten over it, he felt his heart squeeze. It was as if something was wrong, but he couldn't say what. He kept trying to contact her, but the messages weren't answered and the calls were never returned. Meanwhile, Anne was also living under a shadow. She was determined to move on, but couldn't shake the weight of the memories. To make matters worse, Michael constantly surrounded her. He called frequently, pretending to be a concerned friend, trying to comfort her with news that seemed carefully calculated. "William is fine, Anne," Michael would say on one of the calls. "In fact, he's living his life, traveling a lot, meeting new people. Maybe that's what's best for both of you." At first, Anne believed him. The coldness in Michael's words seemed to confirm what she had already feared, that William had really moved on. But over time, the calls started to become insistent, almost invasive. He always seemed to be trying to find out where she was, and even suggested meeting up, which she politely refused. "I think he's interested in me," thought Anne, annoyed. It was then that William made the decision that would change everything. After months of not being able to get over the breakup, he decided that he needed to face her in person. He took a flight to Anne's city, not knowing what he would find, but willing to fight for the only thing that still mattered to him. When he arrived, he went straight to the cafe where Anne used to go. He sat and waited, and fate seemed to be on his side. Anne walked in a few minutes later, looking as surprised as she was cautious to see him. "William?" she said, stopping in the doorway. He stood up, his eyes reflecting a mixture of regret and hope. "Anne, please, give me 5 minutes, that's all. I need to explain everything to you." She hesitated, but something in his gaze made her agree. They sat down at a table in the corner, and William began to talk. He told her about the doubt that had been planted, about the plan to test her love, and about how he knew he had been terribly unfair. Anne listened in silence, but when he mentioned that Michael had insisted on the idea, her face changed. "Michael," she said, frowning, "is he the one who convinced you to do it?" William nodded, confused by her reaction. "Yes, he thought he was helping me. He said he was worried, that he wanted to make sure you weren't with me for the money." Anne was silent for a few seconds, processing the words. Then, as if the pieces were finally falling into place, she opened her cell phone and showed William the dozens of calls and messages she had received from Michael over the last few months. "Look at this," she said, handing him the device. "Michael called all the time, saying that you were getting on with your life. He said he just wanted to help me, but I started to realize that something was wrong." William picked up the phone, reading the messages with wide eyes. "I can't believe this," he said, his voice low and full of anger. "Did he tell you that I was okay, that I'd moved on?" "Yes," Anne replied, crossing her arms. "And now it makes sense. He wanted to push us apart. He tried to manipulate me while pretending to be your friend." William felt anger growing inside him. He picked up Anne's cell phone and dialed Michael, holding the handset tightly. When Michael answered, his voice came out carefree. "Anne? How nice of you to call me. You never answered my messages. I thought you didn't want to talk to me anymore." Anne exchanged a quick glance with William, who nodded. She took a deep breath, adjusting the tone of her voice to sound vulnerable and hesitant. "Hi, Michael. I was thinking a lot about what you said, about moving on." Michael sounded excited on the other end of the line. "Really? That's great, Anne. I'm glad you're starting to see things differently. You deserve better than to be stuck in the past, you know?" Anne looked at William again, trying not to show anything in her expression. "You're right, Michael. Maybe it's time to leave William in the past. He's moved on, hasn't he?" "Oh, yes," Michael replied without hesitation. "He's doing great, traveling a lot, you know. I think he's in the Caribbean now with a new girlfriend. He seems very happy." Upon hearing this, William clenched his fists. His breathing became heavier, and Anne held out her hand to calm him down while she continued the conversation. "I see," she said, feigning sadness. Maybe I should try to start again too." "I think you should," Michael encouraged her enthusiastically. "Actually, I was thinking about something. Why don't we go back to Greece? Just the two of us. We could start again, in a different way, as it should have been from the beginning. The two of us." The words echoed around the room like a bomb. William could no longer contain himself. He reached out and picked up his cell phone, bringing it close to his mouth. "Michael," he said, his voice charged with fury, "you're a bastard." On the other end of the line, there was a sudden silence. Michael took a few seconds to process what was happening before stammering, "What?" "You heard right," interrupted William, his voice firm. "I heard everything, Michael. Every word. You lied to me, you lied to Anne. You tried to destroy everything between us, and now you're trying to convince her to stay with you. Is that it?" I don't know what you're talking about," said Michael, his voice visibly shaken. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," William retorted. "You were the worst friend anyone could ever have. I trusted you, and all you did was try to break us up. Well, Michael, congratulations, because now we know exactly who you are." Before Michael could reply, William hung up the phone and threw it on the table, his chest rising and falling rapidly as he tried to contain his anger. Anne was silent for a moment, watching him. Then slowly, she approached him and placed a hand on his. "William," she said softly, "I was deceived too, but now we know the truth." He looked at her, his eyes still reflecting guilt and pain. "I'm so sorry, Anne, for everything, for letting him poison our relationship. I should have trusted you from the start." Anne squeezed his hand, a small smile appearing on her face. "We've both made mistakes, but maybe we can start again. No Michael, no lies, just the two of us." William said nothing. He just pulled Anne into a tight embrace, as if trying to make sure she didn't disappear again. When their lips met, it was as if all the weight of the last few months disappeared. At that moment, they knew that despite everything, they had something rare and precious, a second chance. The message I want to leave you with today is that trust is a valuable gift. Don't give it to just anyone, but don't be afraid to trust those who really deserve it. Learn to listen to your heart and observe the actions of the people around you. After all, the relationships we build on trust are the ones that strengthen us the most.